159 years ago, a time when the fields of North America were still wet with the blood of men fighting the Civil War, something happened in a peaceful corner of this country that changed religion forever. A woman was ordained by a religious movement into its ministry. As that religious movement had no hierarchy, she was then the equal of male peers in her vocation. Her name was Olivia Brown, and she was a Universalist minister. Olivia Brown was the first woman ordained to the ministry in this country whose ordination was denominationally recognized, and her lifelong struggle was for the equality of women under the law, and especially the right to vote. She was born in 1835 on a farm near Kalamazoo, Michigan. Her parents were immigrants from the Green Mountains of Vermont. They were both Universalists, and her mother taught her from an early age that men and women were equal, and her father agreed. That was an extraordinary opinion for that era. We don't know where the Browns came to that, how the Browns came to that point. Her mother also taught her from an early age the basic tenets of universalism, that salvation is extended to all human beings, that God is kind and loving, not angry and vengeful, and that hell did not exist as traditionally understood. These were still radical ideas in the early 19th century, as much as they were in some communities, might be in some communities today. They would say that stay with Olivia Brown for all of her life, and the combination of faith in God's love and a belief in human equality strengthened her character. So did a confidence in the power of education. There was no school where she was growing up, so her father built the first school there on his own land and paid a teacher to come teach his children and the neighborhood children from his own pocket. She received the foundation of her learning. When she turned 14, Olivia convinced her father to send her to a boarding school in the local town, the equivalent of a high school today. There an event occurred that awoke her social conscience. In the literary society of the school, the rules stated that though boys had to give orations without notes, memorizing them, girls had to give their speeches from manuscript. Boys could participate in debates, girls could not. It was considered inappropriate for women to have their own opinions and to argue them publicly. Olivia did not like this rule, so she convinced the boy who headed the literary society to motion for the rules to be changed. The faculty members said they would resign in support of this group if they changed those rules. In this event, Olivia realized that though her mind was not considered equal to a man's, after high school, she convinced her father to send her to Mount Holyoke Academy in Massachusetts. The school was very strict. Young women were not even permitted to look out windows. I don't know what the fear was. Maybe they would see some of the world from their rooms, who knows. It was also a more religious environment than she had ever lived in. When she entered Holyoke, girls had to declare themselves as professing Christians, or hopefully pious, or just plain hopeless. I don't know which category Olivia placed herself in, but she was moved by a hellfire and brimstone sermon that she heard in the Mount Holyoke Chapel from a conservative visiting preacher. She realized that because she was not reared in a Universalist church, because none was nearby, she did not know the faith of her family as well as she should. So she wrote the offices of the Universalist General Convention in Boston, explaining her situation and requesting materials. After reading those materials in the Bible, she wrote to her mother, "Why don't preachers dwell on God's love, when it was such a motivating force behind Christ's teachings?" She was growing into her Universalist faith. Responding to her daughter's subjection to pressure to conform to a more conservative faith, Olivia's mother wrote back to her, I have great confidence in your excellent, plain common sense. Use it. Don't regard the notion sometimes advanced that it is wrong to use reason in religious opinions. When he heard about the strict rules of conservative faith oppressing his order at Mount Holyoke, Olympia's father wrote to her that she could go elsewhere, and she left Mount Holyoke for Antioch College in Ohio. There, even though it was a Universalist institution, she encountered the literary society rules. Were exactly the same. She did not resist. When it came time for her to give her oration before her class, she walked to the podium and put her rolled-up speech on the front so everybody could see, and then launched into her oration from memory. Don't even ask, just do. She also organized a lecture to be given by the Reverend Antoinette Brown, who was no relation, but was the first woman ordained into the ministry. Antoinette Brown was a Congregationalist. However, her ordination, churches in Congregationalism, as in Unitarianism, could ordain women. They were the only institution that could ordain ministers, and they had ordained a woman. But the Congregationalist denomination refused to acknowledge this ordination. Antoinette Brown eventually left the Congregationalist and became a Unitarian minister. When Olympia Brown graduated from Antioch College, she knew what she wanted to do. She wanted to become a Universalist minister. After being rejected by many seminaries, Brown was accepted at St. Lawrence Theological School in Canton, New York. It was a Universalist seminary. If you feel that God has called you to preach the everlasting gospel, you shall receive from me no hindrance, but rather every aid in my power. I do not believe that women are called to the ministry, but I leave that between you and the great head of the church, wrote in her mission letter. So she entered the theological school and began her studies. At the end of her studies, Olympia Brown approached the New York State General Convention of Universalists, asking to be ordained into the ministry. Universalists were not ordained by local congregations as the Unitarians always were, but were ordained by regional conventions and districts. Olympia was lucky. The week before the New York General Convention met, she preached at the Haveltown Universalist Church. Her sermon so impressed the congregation that they asked her to consider settling in Haveltown as their minister when she graduated from theological school. One of the directors of the New York Universalist General Convention was also in the congregation. When the council met to decide whether to ordain Olympia to the Universalist ministry, she already had a supporter who had experienced her gifts in ministry. And the council heard protests from other ministers about her application. These were not personal attacks, but opposition to any woman being ordained. The council heard testimony for a couple of days. There must have been a lot of them. After deliberating for a day, they called Olympia Brown to their chambers to receive their decision. As she stood before them, they said simply, "Miss Brown, we have agreed to ordain you. Let us set a date for your ordination." On June 23rd, 1863, Olympia Brown became the first woman to receive a denominationally recognized ordination in this country. Her first ministry came shortly thereafter. She was to meet with the Board of Trustees of the Universalist churches in Marshfield and East Montpelier as their candidate for interim ministry, pending a congregational vote. Her application read that the applicant for the ministry was named the Reverend O. Brown. Nobody bothered to tell the congregation that the Reverend O. Brown was a woman, and they didn't know until she showed up for the meeting. After she preached to the congregation, though, they chose to hire her as their minister. She served them for a year, And during that year, she heard about a church in Weymouth Landing, Massachusetts, and was called by that congregation and served a 5-year ministry there. She became the first woman installed as a minister in the United States, and that made news in the newspapers all throughout the United States. 2 years later, she attended the Women's Rights Convention in New York City. She gave her first women's rights speech before the Assembly and joined Susan B. Anthony on a women's rights campaign through the state of New York. Later, she was hired by the Republican Party to campaign for 4 months for the state of Kansas for women's rights to vote. How things have changed. Her congregation let her take the time off, and she set out. The state of Kansas was considering a bill that would extend the suffrage to women. In the end, despite Brown's hard work, the vote lost by a 2-to-1 margin. However, it is interesting that 1/3 of men in the Kansas legislature in 1867 voted for women's suffrage. She returned to Weymouth Landing, but decided after a few years to take a better paid ministry at the Universalist Church in Bridgeport, Connecticut. There, Brown befriended P.T. Barnum, the famous circus owner, who was a member of the church. It is worth considering the way Olympia Brown handled her stewardship sermons. When she gave her stewardship sermon at Bridgeport, she was not above asking those who had more to be more generous in their pledges to the church. And she would pause in her sermon, and she would look down from the pulpit and say, "Mr. Barnum, I need you." According to history, Barnum never failed to oblige her. In Bridgeport, she also married John Henry Willis, who had been one of her congregants at Weymouth Landing. Defying convention, Olympia Brown kept her maiden name, the first of many liberal religious women to follow that practice. In 1878, Brown left Bridgeport for the Church of the Savior in Racine, Wisconsin. Her ministry in Bridgeport was initially happy, but was damaged by a faction that never accepted a woman as minister. Of the 5 congregations that she served, 4 asked her never to leave their pulpit, and she informed them that she would be going to another position. Only Bridgeport was a troubled ministry, and even then it did have its good times. Her life in Racine was fairly quiet in some ways. Brown ministered successfully to the Universalist Church there for 9 years. Her husband started a local newspaper, and she had 2 children. In this regard, I think Olympia Brown and John Henry Willis might have been one of the first professional 2-career families in the United States. They both had college degrees, and both were very professional. At the end of her 9th year in the Racine ministry, Brown decided to resign in order to take on a new cause, pursuing women's suffrage through the court system. The case that she and other Wisconsin suffragettes counted on to grant women the vote did not fall in their favor, and by the end of 1887, she decided to travel all through the United States campaigning from town to town for women's rights. When Brown returned home, she started using her husband's printing press to publish a Wisconsin suffragette newsletter, and her work in women's suffrage continued for another 6 years. 1893 was a tragic year for Olympia Brown. Her mother became ill and came to live with her. Taking care of her mother slowed down her women's suffrage work. Then later that year, her husband had a stroke and died. Her mother's illness and her husband's death also meant that Brown would have to spend the next 7 years caring for her mother and running the family newspaper. However, she did find time to assist Elizabeth Cady Stanton, as mentioned before, in writing the Women's Bible, which was the first non-sexist editing of the King James Version of the Bible. Brown sold the newspaper in 1900, the same year that her mother finally died. At that point, Olivia Brown was 65 years old. Her activities in the suffrage movement had been curtailed by her mother's illness and running a newspaper and probably bringing up two children. She was still president of the Wisconsin Suffrage Association, but her leadership for years had been weak. She became less involved with the movement from 1900 to 1910 and divided her time between her son's home in Washington, D.C., and her home in Racine, Wisconsin. Then, in 1911, younger women complained that the suffrage movement in Wisconsin was hampered by Brown's leadership, and they were probably right. Olivia did not have the energy to pressure the government effectively, so the younger women formed an alternate organization because she would not step down from the Suffrage Association's leadership. They were particularly worried because a bill to give women the vote had passed the state legislature but needed to be approved by the male voters of Wisconsin. It did not pass, and the suffrage organizations realized that the divided efforts hampered them. Olivia Brown stepped down from the presidency so the two groups could merge. She still stayed active. She participated in marches in the nation's capital during the 19-teens. She protested against Wilson's opposition to women's suffrage. Eventually, Wilson broke down and accepted that women should have the vote and threw his political influence into Congress, which ratified the constitutional amendment granting women the vote. It had to be ratified by 2/3 of the states and succeeded in 1920. At that point, Olivia Brown was 85 years old and had campaigned for the right to vote for 60 years. She cast her first vote that year, on November 2nd. Her life's work had come to be. In Racine, at the Racine, Wisconsin congregation, Olivia Brown said, "It is now 33 years since I have resigned my pastorate in this church. That is a long time and many things have happened. But the grandest thing has been the lifting up of the gates and the opening of the doors to the women of America, giving liberty to 27 million women, thus opening to them a new and larger life and a higher ideal. The future opens before them, fraught with great possibilities, noble achievement. It is worth a lifetime to behold victory." In the struggle that she was called to engage in, Olivia Brown was distracted by many missions that she felt compelled to compete. She wanted to lead the suffrage movement. She wanted to marry a man and have children and to care for her mother. She was called to be a minister. Later she became a newspaper publisher. Certainly, in our time, each of us probably has experienced these divisions to our time and energy as much as Olivia Brown did in hers. In this Women's History Month, we acknowledge that our continuing struggle to found a society based upon human equality is not over. Women still encounter discrimination and ignorance. One only needs to check the news every day, unfortunately, to realize this. We are the heirs of such visionary women as Olivia Brown, Clara Barton, and Susan B. Anthony. May we always be grateful for their sacrifices, their commitment, and their abiding faith. May we always follow their example and engage this world so that all people everywhere will know that the frame of their lives affirms the inherent worth, dignity, and recognizes their potential. May we follow Olivia Brown's encouragement as it echoes through time and continue to stand by this faith.